The first thing you're going to do is cut out all the pieces on the outside colored edge where the white and the pattern meet. This will leave you about a half an inch for the 20-inch infant, about a half an inch of seam allowance all the way around. The seam allowance isn't marked because I didn't want it to show up on the design, especially if you needed more or less than that. But just remember, it does have a half an inch seam allowance on the edges. You can use less than that, make your gown a little longer or shorter, depending upon your infant. But the seam allowance is already in it. So I'm going to cut out all the pieces like that. Please note, some pieces are marked with letters. I'm sure that I'm in this one is A, X, X, B, and the same on the other piece. You want to turn the fabric over and mark those. That's where the X's are where snaps are going to go, and the letters are just to help you connect the pieces together at the proper places. But you want to put those letters on the other side of the fabric. Same with these at the other end. All right. Cut out the pieces. Here's the purple. Here's the gold side, and the smaller neck pieces. And I've marked them on the underside with the letters of the alphabet that corresponded with what was on the top side. Since the fabric only prints on one side, I can only put it on the one side of the fabric. It has to be done manually. All right, so next step is putting them together. You're going to put them together, right sides together. First, the purple and the gold capes, put them together, match up your edges, and pin around them. Let me see. These are very simple. If you wanted to put lace around the bottom edge, you would put it in now. For example, you would, before you put them together, you would sew the lace with the finished edge facing up, the sewn edge facing down, right along your edge, and you would sew that down first, maybe 1/4 of an inch in, as I say, you have a half an inch seam allowance. But this is going to be very simple, but I think simple is more elegant in the long run anyway. So around the whole outside edge. If you left a little bit of white or you cut a little bit into the colored edge, it won't matter. As I say, you have a half inch, maybe more, depending upon your statue. At least 1/4 of an inch if your statue is a little bit taller than mine. As I say, that's the most common type size infant. Now, I'm not pinning here because this is the edge that's not going to get sewn. I'm going to sew from here straight down off the edge. Here, straight around. When you get to here, I would sew straight off the edge and then come up and then again around here to the dark line, and then come back to the bottom and sew around the edge and up to here. We're going to leave the neck open so we can turn it. After we're finished the sewing, we are not turning it yet. There's still another step before we turn it. So that's this piece ready to be sewn. Now the smaller pieces, take the purple. We want the A and the A's to match. Again, we're doing right sides together. So this is the A side, B side, so this should be the B side. And we're matching up the round edge here. So purple to the purple and the gold to the gold. Again, right sides together, A's and B's together, edges. This was done on the satin. You can get on cotton or velvet. It said the company instructions, fabric instructions said not to wash the silk. I wouldn't wash the velvet either because you're going to have a problem ironing it afterwards if you don't have a needle board. Again, I don't think it's really absolutely necessary to wash these fabrics because when you're finished, you're never going to be able to wash them again. I think they want you to wash it mostly because of shrinkage and bleeding of the fabric, the dye in the fabric, if you went to wash it a second time, but later after use. But most these vestments are never machine washed after you make them because of what you do to them. If you embroider on them or you add lace to them or things like that, they're usually dry cleaned. And dry cleaned after 3 or 4 years, they don't need to be cleaned often. All right, so we have these 3 pieces ready to sew. Pieces are cut out. They're now sewn together. Now there's one more step before we turn them right sides out. These 2 pieces, we need to cut the curves, clip the curves, and then press the seam to one side. I usually press it down. You can trim off the extra fabric on that if you want. In my case, it's I want to say it's 1/4 of an inch, but I think it's a little bit larger than that. Yeah, it's about not quite a half. So you could cut it, you could trim off extra, leaving it about 1/8 of an inch, which means you'll have less fabric in the seam, which is always a good thing, unless you have to rip it. All right, so anyway, this one's pressed. Let me do this one. And then these two are going to be put together. This one is made out of cotton, so I can use a little steam on it to help, but it's not necessary with all the with the different kinds of fabrics. Some of them you can't use steam. All right, so now these are going to be put right sides together. You're going to put them together, right sides together. First, the purple and the gold capes. You're going to leave
them
one
together.
edge open.
Match up your
So
edges
you can turn it right side out afterwards.
and pin around them. Let me see.
I usually leave, since this part, the really rounded one, the one that looks like a half moon, is the part that goes behind the head. I generally make sure I sew that edge, and if I leave the part of the bottom open, not necessarily the whole bottom, but at least the middle part of the
These
bottom.
are very simple. If you wanted to put lace
this is
around
where
the
I'll turn
bottom
it, and then-
edge, you would
because that's
put
the
it
part that's hidden under the
in
cloak.
now. For example, you would,
Way
before you put
down.
them together, you
This
would
is
sew
what
the
we-
lace with the finished edge facing up, the sewn edge facing down, right along your edge.
And this all
And you
the
would
way
sew
around.
that down first, maybe a quarter of an inch in, as I say, you have a half an inch seam
It
allowance.
doesn't matter whether, which,
But
the
this
directions are the
is
same,
going to be very
regardless
simple.
of which
And-
side you get.
But I think simple is more elegant in the long run anyway.
And it should meet.
So around the whole outside edge. If you left a little bit of white or you cut a little bit into the colored edge, it won't matter. As I say, you have a half inch, maybe more, depending upon your statue. At least a quarter of an inch if your statue is a little bit taller than mine. As I say, that's the most common type size infant. Now, I'm not pinning here because this is the edge that's not going to get sewn. I'm going to sew from here straight down off the edge. Here, straight around. When you get to here, I would sew straight off the edge
Leave the middle of this.
and then come
lower
up
part open.
and then again
I
around
put
here
two pins usually on each
to
side
the,
where
to
I'm
the
gonna stop,
dark line,
so that
and
to
then come
remind
back to the
myself
bottom
stop
and sew
not
around the
sew
edge
across it.
and up to here. We're going to leave the neck open so we can turn it. After we're finished the sewing, we are not turning it yet. There's still another step before we turn it. So that's this piece ready to be sewn. Now the smaller pieces, take the purple. We want the A and the A's to match. Again, we're doing right sides together. So this is the A side, B side, so this should be the B side. And we're matching up the round edge here. So. All right, now I'll put that aside to be sewn. Now this one, again, you want to clip the curves. By that I mean this big curve has to be clipped all the way around. Purple to the purple, and the gold to the gold. And then, right sides together, you're going to sew this black line. Edges. Excuse me, you're not going to sew the black line, that's where you're going to cut. But you have to mark lines to sew. All right, so this was done on the satin. You can get on cotton or velvet. Here's the black line. It said the company instructions, the fabric instructions said not to wash the black line right here. I wouldn't wash the top of the black line because you're going to go a quarter of an inch above that. If you don't have a needle board, and put a dot. And then I'm going to about an eighth of an inch on each side, and absolutely necessary to wash these fabrics because connect those with the arrow of a triangle. The point of an arrow. When you're finished, you're never going to draw a line between that side dot. They want you to wash it mostly and this edge here, and where it's cut in, bleeding of the fabric, the dye in the fabric. If you went to wash it a second time, but later after use. But most these vestments are never machine washed after you make them because of what you do to them. If you embroider on them, or you add laces to them, things like that. They're usually dry cleaned all the way to the bottom on this side. Dry cleaned after 3 or 4 years. And I'm going to do the same thing. Need to be cleaned off this one. All right, so we have these 3 pieces ready to sew. Put a dot a quarter of an inch above it, about an eighth of an inch to each side, and make the arrowhead. And then draw from there down to the bottom. You notice it'll get a little bit wider as you go toward the bottom because you're going from about an eighth of an inch to a half an inch at the bottom, or at least a quarter of an inch, so it'll get a little bit wider. Now these lines that I've just drawn, these are your sew lines. You're going to take it over and you can put some pins in it so your fabric doesn't separate. And you're going to sew on those lines that you just drew in, because then we're going to cut the black line and cut it open. But if you cut it open before you've sewn it, you're going to have trouble matching it up afterwards. So it's better to sew first, then cut. It's kind of like the same thing if you make an alb for the neckline, you do that with the alb. All right, so I've got some pins in here. I'm going to now sew up these lines, up and down these lines, and then I'll come back and cut it open and then turn it right side out. After I clip the curves here. Okay. So these pins I don't need anymore. And I'll come back as soon as I cut this. As soon as I sew this. I wanted to give you a better view of what this looks like with the line around it. Now you can't see it, but I have sewn on this outside line, and now I'm going to cut on that inside line right to there.
Okay, so take these pins out. And cut up that inside line, stopping just before the point, that 1/4 of an inch before the point. I can cut this off the bottom. Now I've clipped my curve so I can turn this right side out. So up here at the neck that I left open, I want to like to cut off the corners just so there's less fabric in them. And doing one section at a time. Doesn't matter which you do first, they'll all come out. And then you're going to want to go in with your finger to the corners and push all your corners in. Actually push them out. Corners aren't so large that you need to use a stick or something to get into them. Your finger will fit. Okay. Third section. And then we're going to press it flat and finish the neck. Okay, so
Now this point will want to pucker a little bit. You can come inside and clip that a little bit if you want. I don't. I think I will though on this one. If you use the thicker fabric, you're going to have to clip. The thin fabric like satin, you probably won't have to. Just clipping a little bit more to release the tension there. But you don't want to clip it all the way to the threads. Just that 1/4 of an inch you left there, clip into about 1/8 of it, 1/8 of an inch of it. Okay. This one too a little bit. Okay, so now, turned right side out, you have this. Now, I'm going to press this. And we're ready for the neck edge. Now, some of them have a long strip that you cut on a bias that you can put around here. The larger ones don't have that because there's not enough fabric that I could put it in there on the bias. If it doesn't have it, it doesn't matter. You can make your own, or what I generally do, I don't generally even use that tape. I usually use lace that has been gathered on one edge and sew that around on both sides, right at the edge, right at the raw edge. So I'll sew it down on this side and then do the same thing on the other side. I don't have to use the same lace on both sides. I can use different laces because you're only going to see one side at a time. It doesn't have to match the lace that you put around the cuffs. It just, it gives it a nice finish, but you can, if you just want something plain, you use the bias tape or make a bias tape. Even just plain white bias tape going around this would be nice. All right, so this one is ready for the neck edge. Now this piece, take the pins out, clip edges again. Cut your excess fabric off if you wish. Cut your corners. All right, you got to make sure you really do this, the rounded top here. If you want it to lay right, about every ½ inch. This is a pretty sharp curve. Unlike this one, which was, could have done every 2 or 3 inches. Okay, now turn this right side out. And press it again. I'm going to pin this edge down a little bit so before I press it so it doesn't keep rolling in. Just so that I make sure that I have it all pulled out. Because it does like to roll in on itself. I'm going to hit that with an iron. Press it. I need to press the bottom too. Okay, so
Once I have the part that's sewn pressed, then I'll have to turn this little bit in the middle so that I can sew across. I'll sew top stitch across the whole lower edge. And does it matter if this edge is kind of bumpy or straight? No, because this is underneath. This edge is the important edge. That's why we left this edge open, the lower edge. By bumpy, I mean we're turning it without clipping the curve. Okay. So I'm going to put some pins in this so I can sew it. And the other thing we're going to need to sew on this is we need to put something to tie it. So you can use cord like this. You can use cord like this. Also, you don't have to tie it. There's X's on there where you could attach it to the neck of this and put snaps. I prefer putting cord rather than snaps. The original design had snaps, but I like cord better. So to put the cord, you need to line up these two seam lines. Because you want to sew the cord across both of them at the same time. And you can feel it more than see it. You press the seam allowance down, but you'll feel it in there. To the end. And now that I've got this pinned together, I'll sew the bottom and then I'll come back and whichever one of these I use, I'll probably use this one. Leave about 6 inches, 8 inches, then start it here, and I'll do a zigzag across it, sewing down. It doesn't matter which side you sew it on, because this is gold, I'll probably put it on the gold side. And sew it all the way across this seam, from one end to the other, and then leave another 6 inches at the other end. So, about there. Okay, so I'll do that, and and I will put lace around the edge here. It's pretty, but I think I like this one better. Okay, and I'll put it on both sides of this. And then I'll come back. Okay, so I've sewn the cord around the neck, close the bottom. I've sewn lace around the edge of this neck on both sides. And so this is the way it works. I'll tie this around his neck. So I'm tying this around his neck. Oh, what I haven't done is put the snap on this, but it's better to try it first before so you decide where it's going to go. Because it will change from statue to statue. Alright, so this is where I want to snap in the back. I'll put a pin there to mark it. Close it for now. Alright, so the way it works is this. It lays here. Now you're going to make a lace cuff to go around here. You could use any kind of lace. Gather it, or gather it with elastic, which makes it fit better. And then this will fold back, and this will fold back, and or vice versa if you're doing the purple side out. You'll reverse the actually the purple side would be this side out because you want to see the purple on the outside. They're made to be complementary colors, purple and gold, or purple and rose. I think I'm going to be changing this to purple and rose instead of gold, and use the gold with the red. And then the snap will work with whichever side is out, it won't matter. Whichever side looks better. I think I would put the purple side up rather than the gold on this. And you can press it or you can pin it if you want to. And that's the way he will look when he's finished. If you want to pin it, because it's newly made and it hasn't gotten too used to itself yet, you can always put a pin here to keep these sides from. And as I say, you want to take a piece of lace around his hands here. Let me show you. Both of these are the same. Those are the same size. This one is satin. This one is cotton. This is the lace that I put around his hands. It's just elastic. It's just lace. In this case, it's about 1 inch. Larger statues you'll want maybe to 3 inches. This is about 1.5 inch, gathered with elastic, and this will fit over his hand. And these statues being repaired, I haven't put the globe back in their hands yet, but they're about the same size. It will fit either of them, whether they have clothes on like this one, or they don't, like this one did. So this is the 15-inch size, which means they're 15 from here to the table. All together, they're more like 16 inches. They're 13 inches, excuse me, they're 13 inches from here, from the neck to the table. The 15 inches is the taller statue, and there's also a smaller one. So, very simple infant clothes.